So my friends, I think it's important to acknowledge that this reading can be a confusing one. It can be hard to understand what Jesus is talking about in today's reading. And, the king, he has this, it seems like extraordinary anger, just a great wrath. The guy without the wedding garments, he comes and he sends him away outside where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. And it can seem very harsh. And we can wonder, what is Jesus saying in today's parable? It doesn't make a ton of sense. And I think it's important to understand that sometimes when you're trying to make a point, especially with a story, you can sort of extravagate it, make it bigger than it is, and in an effort to sort of wake us up, to help us, to stir us up, to get us to think, to get us to respond. And so that's something similar that's happening in today's parable. So God's anger, we see the theme of anger of the king. And, sometimes when we read this, it can be concerning, it can confuse us. But I think it's important to understand that God does not have emotions like we do. He's not angry when we're bad. He's not happy when we're good. That would give us a sort of power over God. How we act influences how he feels. That's not actually the way it works. It's really hard to understand in our minds because we're humans. We're completely tied to our emotions. But God is not. God's only emotional state, his constant emotional state, is love. Constantly. And love, it doesn't mean giving permission to do whatever you want. Sometimes love demands something. And that's one of the themes in today's gospel. God's anger today, it's representing his desire for us to set things right in our lives, because our lives matter. Our choices, our decisions, they affect our lives, and they affect other people's lives, our family, our kids, the world's. Our choices have consequences. It matters what we do. We cannot do whatever we want to do. And so what's going on in today's parable? Well, the king, he gives a wedding banquet, a big celebration, and it's sort of meant to demonstrate this. There's nothing better that you could possibly be doing with your time than come to this wedding banquet. Incredible invitation. It would be ridiculous to turn down this invitation. Think of being invited, one of 100 people, into the White House with the president. It's like, you're going to make time for that. You're going to figure it out. You're going to go. You're invited to the Vatican with Pope Francis. It's like, yeah, you would probably make it work. But what happens today in the readings with the people that were invited? Well, they respond with absolute indifference. They don't care at all. It says one went to their farm and another to his business. They just went about their lives. It had no effect on them. They were invited to incredible things, heavenly things, but they ignored it. They didn't care. Sometimes in our lives, we can have that sort of same mentality. We are invited to heaven. We're invited to eternal life. And that's an incredible invitation. But sometimes ourselves or other people, we can have this sort of ho-hum, not a big deal, whatever, who cares sort of mentality. Sometimes, people, there's life after death. Oh, that's great. There's something after death, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really affect anything. Well, they don't get it. That's what God is saying in today's parable. Don't you get what you're invited to? Don't you understand? Wake up. And, we can have this mentality, there's life after death, whatever, but it doesn't affect it. It doesn't affect us. We don't bother, some people don't bother coming to church. They don't bother coming to the wedding feast. They don't bother coming. And that's not good enough of a response. We don't get it sometimes. And what's our response? Sometimes we can think we have other things to do. We can be bored. We can get distracted or whatever. But God is inviting us to understand what it is we're invited to. We are invited to heaven. And that's an incredible, incredible invitation that should not be ignored. And so what if we do? What if we do ignore this invitation? What if our family and our friends, what if they ignore it? Well, what does the king do? After their refusal, he invites everybody. There's a relentless offering of his grace. He's always reaching out to us, always inviting us. Not because we're good, not because we've earned the invitation, but simply because of how good God is. He invites the good and he invites the bad alike, it says in today's readings. He invites us. He invites us. He invites us over and over and over. And that's the unbelievable mercy of God. That even when we refuse, even when our hearts are hardened, he doesn't stop inviting us. And so that should give us hope. That should give us hope for ourselves, for the many times we've fallen away from God, the times our hearts have become hardened towards him, the times we've rejected him, sinned, and had this ho-hum mentality towards God. God will not stop offering us grace. And it's the same with our loved ones. People who, we love that have rejected the church, rejected God. God is pursuing them. He is inviting them over and over. He will not stop inviting them. And so when we receive this grace, when we receive this invitation, it actually has to have an effect on our lives. We can't just go about our lives doing whatever we want to do anymore. It actually has to change us. It has to affect us. And that's the point that's being driven home, that's trying to be made with the guy without the wedding garments. So he comes to the wedding, but he doesn't have his wedding garments on. So the wedding garment, it stands for a developed spiritual life. Someone who is covered by the grace of God, who understands the unbelievable love and mercy that God has for them. And so I think it's important to understand and think about, wedding garments, they look relatively the same. It's not whatever works best for me is what I'm going to wear to this wedding. It's like, imagine coming to a wedding with just a purple crazy outfit, it'd just be ridiculous, it'd be odd, it'd be weird, and imagine a funeral, even drive it home even more. A super flowery, like a Cinderella kind of dress, that'd be completely inappropriate, it wouldn't make any sense. But we can have this sort of mentality towards God sometimes, especially with people who are spiritual but not religious. That sort of idea. I'm going to pray to God, I'm going to go to God, but I'm going to go to God on my conditions. I'm going to pray to God the way that I want to pray to God. And sometimes you can even fall into this error, this thought of, God should be grateful that I'm praying to him at all. The church should be grateful that I'm showing up to Mass at all. And that's a completely wrong mentality. That's the mentality of someone who doesn't get it. They don't get it. They don't understand. And so what does God ask us to do? Well, he invites us to find him in the sacraments, to put on the wedding garment of the sacraments of the church, of Mass, of confession. We can't just do whatever it is that we want to do. God doesn't ask us to worship him however we want to worship him. He asks us to worship him in a specific way because he knows what's best for us. And what's best for us might not be, going to a place with great emotions and a fun experience. If we were looking for that, we wouldn't come here today. We would go somewhere else. But that's not what God asks of us. Because the Mass isn't about you. Worshiping God is not about you. It's about God. It's about what he asks of us. And so we should be generous to God, just as he's been so generous to us. He knows what's best for us. And so I think there's two main takeaways from today's readings, just to leave you with. The first is that we have to accept the invitation of God. Accept the grace that he's offering us in our lives. Over and over, he's inviting us. He's inviting us constantly because he loves us so deeply, and he wants us, he longs for us to come to the wedding feast. He wants us in heaven. He doesn't want us to refuse. He wants us to come. But when we come, when we say yes to God, when we say yes to heaven, to pursuing the things of God, we have to pursue him on his terms, not ours. That would be a lie. That wouldn't be of God. So the first point, accept the invitation. And the second point, after we have accepted the invitation, we can't just do whatever we want to do. It actually has to affect our lives. There are demands that are placed on us because of our yes to the invitation. Demands that are so small, that are so easy, that are so good, but sometimes we don't understand. Demands that are so good because God knows what is best for us. And so, my friends, today, let's just ask God for the grace to accept his invitation, to really have our lives transformed by his grace, by understanding the incredible love and mercy of God, the invitation that we're offered, and have great gratitude for that invitation. And let's examine our lives to see how it is that we've accepted his invitation, but how we've qualified it, the demands we've placed on God. Let's ask for the grace to understand that he wants what's best for us and to respond to him with fully generous hearts. Because when we do that, God will respond to us in so much more generous ways. So we ask for the grace, we ask for his love, we ask for his mercy.